Our second wash has dried, and our next couple of washes are really just to finish it off and to make any adjustments we think are necessary as we add the darks and the lights. So we are going to use a bit of white watercolor paint to recover some of the areas where we don't have enough white, and we're going to work on this area here to figure out what's the best approach for our focal point, which is right here, and being able to push the barns back into the background. So that's our challenge. And what we're going to do is we're going to be pretty light touched with the darks in this area here and trying to get rid of some of the contrast. So we may in fact apply some darker blue in a few areas just so that we don't have as much contrast and we get this part, our focal point, to stand out more. That's the goal, and let's see if we can achieve it. Our first objective is to mix some paints that we can work with here, and I already have some on my palette, and I could probably use some of this, but it might be a better idea just to clean it up for a minute. So that I'm going to leave the red there just because I want to make sure I can match that red as we go further. And it's another reason why it's a good idea to put your colors on a piece of paper like we did here, so that we can make sure that we're a close match to the colors that we want to use. I think there's something underneath here, yes. So we'll leave the red, but we'll wipe off everything else that we have here. And we will apply some water to our palette, wake it up. Another good idea is to actually wet our paper, because we do have some wrinkling occurring, and let's wet it before we mix up our colors. Okay. If it's still curling in certain spots, you can just apply more water to those areas. Sometimes getting some water underneath helps a little bit too. Okay, so we'll let that sit for a minute, and then we'll mix up the colors that we're going to be using. So we had for our blue, I don't think we need any more cerulean, but maybe what we'll do is we'll just mix some cerulean with cobalt, and that'll be a lighter blue. We might apply that to the grassy area because we don't really want the grassy area to stand out too much, and I think we might that might be beneficial if we have a look at that. And then we have our barn color, which we have here, which was the Pyro Red, a bit of cerulean, a bit of Quin Rose, and a bit of burnt sienna. So we'll just freshen up that puddle that we have here. And then we need some dark, so I'm going to start with an ultramarine and a burnt sienna mixture here that will what we want is a very neutral gray. So we're going to put that there. We can use that on the fence, on the trees, maybe a little bit more. Let's just go with a bit more because this paint has to be fairly thick, sticking on your palette at this stage. Same with this mixture. We should probably add a little bit more paint to this mixture, although we don't need a huge amount of red. And Pyro. We'll put a little bit more cerulean in that. Just test that color for a second. A little bit too brown, so it needs maybe some Quin Rose. Okay, we have that color. We have cerulean. Let's just have a ultramarine on its own. Okay, and I think that is probably a good mixture. So, where do we start next? A couple of areas that really what we're doing here is correcting our mid-tone layer before we start with our darks. So I just want to look at a couple areas and figure out, does it actually need more in those areas? And well, we have pencil marks, which I guess is an issue, but I think one of the easiest ways to kind of send those to the background is to just apply, make sure our paper is still wet, and apply a little bit of ultramarine around these trees and let that just bleed up. So it will hide the pencil marks to a certain extent. I can also apply a bit of that to this tree back here, just sending it a bit into the background. And I can probably apply that to this tree here, although I think that tree might have to be made a little bit taller. I keep making it taller until it adjusts to this. So that's all we did there, was we applied a bit of ultramarine. And since it's damp, I think the other thing that would be helpful here is just to get some of that ultramarine on the area here so that we can start highlighting our pole, our snow-covered pole, a bit more. So I'm just going to apply that here. And it looks pretty dark right now, but that will soften out. I'm just going to put a lot of water on my brush and soften that as I go a bit further down. And then I'm going to soften the top of that as well, let that ultramarine flow into this background part as well. Okay, and then the other area that I think it needs a bit more ultramarine is probably over here. And we're going to go right through that, all of this at this point. Okay, with that ultramarine. Just spread that on through. And the fence, we're going to darken that first. It's too wet to put the ultramarine in at this point. And then the other place that I thought we could benefit with some more color is actually down in here. So we do want a lot of white here, but we also want some darks in these areas. that we've already identified. So I'm just going to apply a little bit more dark in those areas. And that's going to help whiten up this as well. Okay. All right. So I think that's about it. We could try putting a little bit of ultramarine in here because these look so stark right now. So I'm just going to go through that. And that kind of smooths everything out. This part here we don't really want to be emphasized, so I'm just putting some there as well. Okay. And I think we have to do that on this side because we really don't want it brighter as it goes out off the edge of the paper. Okay. Next step is to let it dry a little bit, and then we'll apply our darker colors. Before we do that, though, I think we might be ready to work on this tree. And what I want to do is just darken certain spots here. And one of the things I heard recently is that trees' branches are generally straight. The only thing that makes them look curved is when the angle changes. So not to do them, when you do them, stop each time and make that angle. So straight, 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 but it does look a little bit like it was curved, but it's curved based on straight marks. And I really want this one to kind of lean more towards this way. Don't forget how branch is crossing over. And as you get down, you can continue going all the way down to the trunk. And that way it widens the trunk as it goes. Another thing I think people tend to do is they never make their trunks wide enough, especially at the bottom. Okay, and then this one here is going very straight up. This one going right across. This one straight up as well. Okay, and now I can do some smaller branches. I'm changing brushes. And this brush, the trick with that is to hold it at the end. It does need a lot of paint, so it's, in some ways it's a bit challenging because if you don't have enough paint on it, you just get dry brush marks. but it can do very delicate branches, although it's not working right now. I'm going to show you one other brush. Let me just find it. This brush is a Da Vinci Casino. I think there's a name for this brush and I'll remember it soon. Might be able to dub that in, but it is it holds a lot of paint because it has this area of the brush that holds the paint, and then that gradually goes into the tip. And again, it's one of those brushes where you hold it high up, but it can do some delicate branches as well. This is a pretty small painting, so it's kind of hard to get that kind of detail into it. But I thought I'd show you that brush. The top of this is looking kind of too even. In the winter, it's okay if your branches stick up a little bit higher than the tree. Maybe there's some bare branches at the very top. The other thing you can do is you can just kind of dab it at the top to create these little tiny branches. It's almost like dry brushing, but each time it's creating little branches as you do this. Need some weird ones hanging out there. Okay, so that's it. And then if you think you need more over here, you can do that. But we don't want too much detail in that far tree. Well, we have those two brushes out. Let's go down to the bottom here, where all of these bushes are. I probably need some more paint. So the barbed wire, the bushes, all of this down in this area. So I'm mixing up a bigger puddle again of my burnt sienna and my ultramarine. And there's a few tricks you can use if you want. You can use tape, and if you take some scissors and you make a concave and a convex shape, you can use these to create your lines. So there we have one. And I'll show you what I mean by this. Okay, so I'm going to have one that dips this way. It's easy to create, but I think it's because I've got tape stuck to my finger. Okay, so if I want a bunch of twigs and barbed wire and all this paraphernalia down here coming out here, I can cover this up with my tape, and then I can take one of these brushes and I can just start painting lines here. I can also do my barbed wire that's coming down from here. I might put a little bit more blue into this mixture as well. Just darken it up a bit. Okay, I need a bit more water on this brush. But basically it lets you create all this mess that happens to be down here. And a good idea to rotate through the brushes that you have as you do this. And then you can put your next tape down. I think we did this when I did the instruction for our first value study, but just thought I'd show you that to you again. I want some, I might use my Escoda brush here too, because it holds a lot of paint and helps us do those lines. Okay, so I took a little break, so I'm just going to freshen up my palette here. Mix some more of our dark color. Put a lot of water in there, so I'm going to have to get a lot of paint. Oops. I might just add some neutral tint here. Maybe I'll have to mix another puddle here. Okay, I have one watery and one pretty thick, so I think I will make out okay. All right, so I have my two brushes that I will be using for the detail. Let's start with this one. And I was just continuing on. There's a lot of wires running across this, a bit thicker. So I'm just going to put those in. It helps define the shape as well. And then there's wires. This again will help define the shape. And in between these two, it's quite dark. I'm just putting that in, making sure these come down onto the snow. Maybe a bit more ultramarine in this mixture. It's a bit of a blue tint. The reason I put these down into the snow originally was I didn't want them going off of the paper, which was a good idea. So I'm just gonna make sure I have them ending. Use the other brush. It's a little bit more paint. Okay. We have to end. Now this one is going to be a bit of a problem, but maybe we'll just turn that into something that's sticking up like this. That should be fine. Okay, and then let's continue on with our paraphernalia, I'm calling it. All this stuff coming off of here. Okay, a little bit more blue into this. Okay, and this contrast is important in this area. And we're going to move our tape to the next section that we need it. I'll change the position a bit. So this goes down here. This one actually goes quite straight, so maybe I'll just use a different piece of tape there. And these little dips are a good spot to have a lot of this stuff coming up. And this goes like this. Could have another one going down like that. I did want these to be a bit bluer, but they're turning out kind of brown in this mixture. And then I have these circles that are, the wire is just kind of spinning around. I like the shape of them. And then we have a lot of wires coming like this. Switch to the other brush. Okay. Now I'm going to go to my Escoda because it holds a lot of paint and it also lets me do some finer lines. A lot of lines coming up this part. Okay, and the benefit of this is here we can really highlight some of these snow peaks. All right, that might be enough. And then there is some stuff here that's more like grasses. And I took a bit of the red because I'm going to make these into some vegetation. in a few different areas. I thought it would be complementary to the barn. Throw a few of those in here and there. And then I'm going to move my tape again. And we're going to put it on this area. I might just separate these again. So, do it like that. Like this. And this area is not as quite as detailed, but I like this part where this was all slanting over. And you can get, you know, little spots where it's very dark. And that whole concept of having the darkest dark and the lightest lights all in this one area really does bring that into the foreground and makes that part of the painting the focal point. Okay, so we're done there. And our next step is to go in with some white. You can use titanium white, you can use Chinese white, or you can use this Dr. Merton's bleed proof white. And we'll clean off our brushes and the area and start with the white. I'm going to use the Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white, not Phil. And generally I don't put white in my palette because I find it will discolor your paints. So that's an important point. And I've just taken a lot of paint on my brush. This does tend to stick to your brushes, so as soon as you're finished, you really need to clean your brushes appropriately. And I'm going to clean this one right away because I want to try an experiment here. I'm not sure if it's going to work, but I wanted to give the top of these barns a look that made them look more like snow, because I think I kind of lost the snow effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wet below the barn there. I'm going to take some of my white. The other advantage of this is it gets rid of any pencil marks you might have up here. And the white is kind of blending in with what's there already. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'll get a different brush here so I can use two brushes at once. And I'm going to wet down here and do the same thing. Just let it blend in. I think this might help make the barns look a little more snowy. Okay, maybe a bit thicker here. And And I have some pencil marks that I can get rid of, so that this roof is almost blending in with what is down below, which I'm okay with because that is the one behind. And then I might have to wait till it dries, but I could put, you know, an edge of snow here. Okay, and then just blend that out. Okay, so that helped. The other thing is this bled into the background. So I can just cover that up a bit. Like so. Okay, and I'm okay with this part here kind of blending in entirely. Here, oops, I moved a little bit. Okay, same thing here. We're going to put some white on the top of this barn. Cover up these pencil marks and let it bleed into what's down below. Okay, and then soften it out. So I think it helps it look a bit more like snow there. And then same thing here. Bit of white there. Maybe need a tiny bit more white on our brush. Sometimes with this bleed proof, you have to go in twice to get it to show up. It fades quite a bit. I put too much there. Let's take some of that and spread it out. So it's starting to look a little snowier. This part here. And then in this case, I can probably put a little bit of snow just on the top there. I'm trying to cover up these black pencil marks that we see. Okay. Really has to be blended in. That's why we wet it first. Okay, so that's that part, and then I'm gonna water down my brush a little bit because when I do the back fence, the highlights on the back fence, I don't want them as bright as the ones that I do on the front. Yeah, this brush is it's too thick on the brush. Okay, so I'm just doing this in a few spots. I don't want to do it on every mark. Most important is the tops where it meets this barn. The tops of these posts are probably a good spot as well. And then I'm going to put a fairly big line down here. I want this to look like the road. But I don't want it going right off the page because it's going to take the viewer out of the painting. Okay, and we might have to put some more blue behind these posts, because right now it doesn't really look like snow. It looks like it's white behind there, and we really don't want it to look like that. Okay, gotta tighten this up. Keep losing our board. Okay. Just a few of these. We don't need a lot. You could put a few dots on the tree. Just where the branches are meeting. And then this here, we want to round out and make sure that that stands out. And then we're going to use a skinny brush. This complete synthetic from Simply Simmons seems to work the best. Just putting some areas back in here. Maybe these are snow. Put a top on that. Defining some of these lines that we had better. And I think that's about it. So the only other thing I would probably do is try to put some more blue in our background. I'm rinsing off this brush before it dries out. Okay, so we said we thought that we needed some navy blue in the ultramarine blue in the fence to make the whites look whiter. So I'm gonna do that. Oops, a bit too dark. Gotta check my color, make sure I've got the right color here. I think it was more cobalt. So at the bottom of the black is where I want this blue. So every time I see the black bottom, I'm putting the blue. That makes sense. Yeah, close enough, I think. One more time for this spot here. One more time with the white. Okay. It usually takes 2 coats for this white to show up well. Okay, now we could put some here. But just a tiny bit. I think that's good enough. I think we're done. Hope you enjoyed that. If you want to, you could add snow. Maybe we'll do that, just to give it a real feeling of snow. Now, the trick with snow is when you're splattering. Move this for a second. It can be very directional, and you don't want, I'm going to find a piece of spare paper where it's going to show up on, I think I'll just use this one. So when you're spattering, you don't want to do it so hard that it flows this way. What I like to do is go down, hold the brush at the end, and if you hit it too hard, then you start getting these directional ones, which is really what you don't want. The other option is to use a fan brush. I got one here. And the fan brush spatters quite nicely as well. So let's just put some on our fan brush. You need some water in there too, though. So hold it at the end. And as you can see, the fan brush has a good effect because there's a variety of sizes. So let's go with that. Hit it too hard there. I got a bit of directional, which you don't want. And I'm just looking for the spots where the contrast is going to show up and adding it there. A little bit more. And different sizes of dots is a good snowflakes, because there would be a variety of them depending on how far they are away from you. And there we go. It's snowing. Thank you for joining me today, and stay tuned for the next one. I'm going to try one more thing because the front was bothering me a little bit. I thought it needed a darker blue in there, and we're going to give that a shot and see if that helps harmonize and bring the foreground closer to us. So I'm just going to mix up, clean my brushes. So I've got white all over them. I'm going to mix up a pretty thick mix. Of blues for the foreground. And what I'm going to do is actually make this snow darker. Okay. So it's quite dark now in the foreground, and then I'm going to take a wipeout brush and just smooth out some of those lines. Just want to capture a little bit of the purple that's in the background, so I'm going to add a tiny bit of Imperial purple to this mixture in certain spots, kind of matching what we have back there. Okay. And then I might even be crazy enough to add some white into this. Okay, we'll see how that looks when it dries, whether we've met our objective there. It's all about the contrast, so I'm just making sure I've got some contrast still in here. And getting rid of any hard lines.